Good afternoon and a warm welcome to this next TED Talk by Benjamin John, who is joining us virtually from Bangalore. Thank you, Benjamin, for joining us today. Just a quick background before I introduce Benjamin. This is the TED Talks are hosted by the TEDS initiative at CPR, which is Transboundary Rivers, Ecologies, and Development Studies. We organize these TED Talks in the broader area of water policy and governance, but this one is one of, I think it is the 10th talk in the particular series of water-centric master planning in India. That's the theme of this series, and this is the 10th talk. And for those of you who are aware of it, some of you are aware of it, this is organized as part of, these talks are organized as part of this research program that we have with the support of National Mission for Clean Ganga. It's under an MOU with them on pursuing research and knowledge production to inform rejuvenating India's rivers. And this particular research project is about, reimagining statutory master planning in India, essentially to accommodate water and other environmental concerns, including the climate change, which is something that is of the topic today. This just quickly to go to introduce today's speaker. This is the talk is on something that is closely related to the theme. This is mainstreaming climate action into statutory master planning. This is the title of the talk. Just to sort of a quick remark to sort of highlight or stress the importance of this particular talk is because, Benjamin is someone who heads who is the head of implementation for South and West Asia at C40 cities. And they are currently helping out Chennai city in preparing their master plan and accommodating climate change concerns into it. And this is primarily, I think I'm partly excited about this talk, partly because I think one of the things that the reason why we started this series is to primarily gather practitioner perspectives, because there is very little literature on accommodating generally environmental and climate change concerns into the statutory master planning. So we started this series to gather practitioner perspectives and experiential wisdom that is with the practitioners out there who are involved in master plan preparation. So this particular talk is quite relevant to this theories, and then we hope that Benjamin's talk will bring in some teething troubles about how, besides just talking about the technical challenges of bringing in these concerns into the conventional statutory master planning, but also engaging with the institutional culture in bringing these sensibilities into master planning. With that, let me just quickly introduce Benjamin. Benjamin serves as I said, head of the implementation for South and West Asia at C40 cities. His work with Chennai and Bangalore includes helping both cities prepare their climate action plans and further supporting the implementation of high impact actions across various sectors such as energy, transport, land use planning, etc. He is currently supporting Chennai in the preparation of its next master plan. I think, if I understand right, I think Benjamin could add a bit more about it. I think Tamil Nadu has recently redrafted their town planning legislation. Perhaps I think C40 is also involved in it. Before joining C40, Benjamin worked with the National Institute of Urban Affairs in Delhi, where he contributed to the preparation of the draft master plan of Delhi 2041. And then earlier, he worked with a Dutch agency that was involved in preparation of draft revised master plan of Bengaluru for 2031 as well. And he has also been involved in preparation of greenfield urban extension master plans for Surat and Aurangabad. I'm guessing these are town planning schemes. I don't know, you could add a bit more in your initial remarks, Benjamin. So quickly, before I hand it over to Benjamin, a couple of housekeeping. One is that I think that's not couple, just one, because Benjamin is joining online. Is that those who have joined us online, please put your questions in the Q&A space, and then I'll come to them at the end of the lecture. And then Benjamin, we usually give about 40 minutes for the talk, and then we open up for discussion. With that, hand it over to you, Benjamin.
Yeah, thank you so much, Srinivas, for that fantastic introduction. I look forward to this discussion. So I think I have roughly about 50 slides. Maybe I might take about 30 to 40 minutes for it. But feel free to kind of stop me at any point. Maybe I can keep a few pauses when I finish certain sections, and then we can definitely, discuss at that point. Or would you want me to just go through the whole thing and then at the end we'll go in for questions? I mean, I'm
No, I
open
think
to any format
since
that
you
you.
are joining us today online, I think it is best that you finish it, and then we address both clarifications as well as questions at the end.
Sure. So how I've structured my talk largely is one, to look at the current state of land use planning in India, and then look at climate action planning and how it's emerged as kind of a new paradigm in how we look at cities. Third is to really understand the need for integration of climate action into land use with the case of Chennai. So again, I mean, there might be a lot of questions from my end as well during this discussion. It might be a lot of questions than a lot of solutions, but let's get into it. So I'll start off with kind of a large, high level kind of framing of where we are at a global level in terms of how our cities are going. So yeah. So my screen is visible, right?
Yes, we can
Yeah,
see your screen.
sure. So I mean, to start off with, I think in the last 2 decades we've started to see this new daring, bold kind of city that's emerging, across the world in different geographies. I mean, this is the Palms in Dubai, which is literally, kind of built in the middle of the, in the sea itself, right? And then not so far away across the Atlantic in Las Vegas, you have again, a kind of an impossible city that's being created in the desert. Um, and this whole question of development versus environment that's emerging, right? Like, uh, do we prioritize the environment or do we prioritize development? Is another question that, again, I think on all of our minds, and it's kind of something that we are dealing with on a day-to-day basis in our cities. And I think what's also happened is, I mean, cities have also become these large uh, places of consumption, and with that, we are creating large spaces for, say, parking in itself, right? Cars and then the way we move in cities itself have been driven by this whole need for us to get from point A to point B quickly, and in our own private vehicles, right? So uh, so according to NASA, the polar ice caps are melting at an alarming rate of about 9% per decade, and the thickness of the Arctic ice has kind of decreased by 40% since 1960. So, I mean, global warming is real and it's a major challenge, and all of us are facing that. It may be the summers in Delhi recently, or the air pollution that we witnessed in November, December in Delhi, or flooding in Bangalore recently, sea level rise in Chennai. So I think the challenge around global warming and climate change is real, and I think uh, I don't think we can afford deniers anymore, right? So, what are we really trying to solve here? I mean, the urban development model that most of our cities are currently following is highly emission intensive, basically car oriented planning, road networks that are promoting cars, urban sprawl, as well as over specialization of land uses, like single use land uses is what we've majorly been following or promoting in most of our land use plans. And I said, what's also happening is our current model of urban planning or city planning is just further making the climate challenge more worse and kind of exacerbating our climate risks. So, increase in land surface temperatures, flooding, loss of carbon sinks. Uh, these are the kind of challenges that our cities are facing today. But I think everything is not you know as dire as things are, but there are models that are emerging that are good case studies, things that we can definitely emulate and follow, like Barcelona's super block, which promotes active travel, uh, block sizes that are at the human scale, uh, mixed use, all of these things that really look at compact cities and development along or around transit. And another one is, of course, Tokyo, which is a great example of transit-oriented development. The way they've been able to really integrate uh, mobility or movement of people with their built environment is something that is a great example of transit-oriented development. So, I mean, that was the kind of setting a larger kind of context in where we are kind of situated, not just in India, but globally as well, um, on where things are. So again, like I said, I have four parts to this discussion or this lecture. The first part is kind of looking at the current state of statutory land use planning in India, and these are more. I think I would say the first and the second, first part at least is a more of a kind of collection of my own thoughts and my experiences that have been built over the last 10, 12 years working across various geographies in India, and then talking about more of our work in at C40, which is on climate action planning, the need to integrate, and our work with Chennai is kind of the way I've structured this talk. So the current state of land use, statutory land use planning in India. So uh, let's go back a bit. So I mean, if you look at the first planning exercises that was taken up in India, it was set against the context of the bubonic plague in Bombay. So the Bombay Improvement Trust was set up in 1896, and then similar issues in Bangalore, where they also set up the Bangalore Improvement Trust. And then areas like Baswangudi, Chamarajpet in Bangalore started was developed, which was like planned layouts, right? So these are some of the earliest uh, instances of kind of planned developments that started coming up in India, and the whole idea of planning kind of emerged from the fact that we kind of were facing like a plague, and there were people who were dying. There were poor sanitation that our cities had, bad and people were suffering in terms of the health related issues. So what we also saw around the same time, I mean, the later part of the 19th century, was many of our cities started getting piped water, right? 1856, Bombay, 1872, Chennai, 1896, Bangalore. And what happened along with this was the decline of natural systems. So natural systems like lakes, ponds were all seen as cesspools of disease. uh, Many of the lakes, for instance, in Bangalore was by this time, in the early 20th century, people started covering it, developing over it. All of that started happening, and lakes were looked at as something where that there was mosquito infestations, dengue, etc. So, I mean, to meet the development needs, they started covering this and really developing over this. And then kind of real, post independence, the first real kind of master planning exercise that was taken up was for Delhi, the Delhi Master Plan 1957 by the Ford Foundation. So about 2072 square kilometers of area was taken up for this first master plan. The focus was on regional development and not really focused on local kind of area based planning, but more a large focus was on the region and how we can kind of manage densities and land uses across the region. And another major focus of the plan was to decongest the core city, old city of Delhi, which was again becoming difficult to live in, and there were issues around health, etc., health and sanitation. So post the DDA Act of 1957, in about decade, multiple states started, putting up their or preparing and notifying their own town and country planning acts. So, be it Maharashtra, Karnataka in 61, Tamil Nadu in 71. So, within a decade, you saw this, and a decade from then, in the 70s, you saw the setting up of the setting up of parastatals like the MMRDA, CMDA, BDA, that which had the main function of providing planning, or doing planning, spatial planning and land use planning for the cities that they were kind of based in, right? So in the 70s and the 80s, you started seeing the emergence of these planned layouts like Jayanagar in Bangalore, Ananagar in Chennai, GK and others in Delhi. So once these development authorities came up, they started actually doing these neighborhoods and planning, with good amount of amenities and good access to open spaces was kind of developed. So even today, if you look at some of these layouts like Jayanagar, they are still quite resilient to climate risks. They have good amount of per capita open spaces. They don't get flooded that easily than compared to the newer layouts that are majorly privately developed. And then when you come to the 90s, I think what changed was the 74th Constitutional Amendment. And I think we shifted into this globalization phase at the same time, with the markets opening up and foreign direct investments coming in. At the same time, I think there was a need that was felt to kind of decentralize planning, right? And empower the urban local bodies. And with that, the 74th Constitutional Amendment 243 ZD talked about Metropolitan Planning Committee, MPCs that need to be set up. And I think there have been a lot of amendments to the Town Country Planning Acts, but I think one of the major ones would be the change of land use, which was kind of allowed many of these geographies, brought up this change of land use. In Karnataka, we have the 14A, which facilitates deviations, which allows you to make changes to your land use based on what was assigned, right? So, I mean, this is kind of, I would say, last 50, 60 years in a gist. Uh, yeah. So the current state of
Listen, quickly, what was that KTCP 14A?
that is change of land use.
Full form is Karnataka Town and Country
Town
Planning
Country Planning Act. Yeah.
Act. Okay.
Act.
14A is the section or article, whatever.
Is the section which allows change of land use.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
So current state of planning in India, I mean, I'm looking at it in the who, how, why, and kind of seeing what kind of city has emerged. So who should be planning? I mean, this is something that's highly contested with the MPC. I mean, this is a problem we faced in Bangalore as well. A major challenge that we were not there was really no consensus on who should be planning. Citizens wanted an MPC to plan, while the government thought the BDA was best suited to prepare the plan or update the plan for Bangalore. And then the issue of there being multiple plans. So cities have multiple plans, like there could be a mobility plan, drainage plan, then about, of course, now climate action plan. So is there really one plan that we can really refer to that integrates all these various layers? Maybe not. I think the overlapping kind of stakeholders that we see, that overlapping jurisdictions and multiple stakeholders in cities. So really the question of who should be planning itself is highly contested. And for instance, Bangalore, while this plan was being prepared by BDA, there were parallel plans also being prepared by citizens, right? So who is planning and who has the jurisdiction to plan itself is a highly contested one, right? And then has planning over time become less consultative? Maybe not, but though many acts don't provide for consultation while the plan is prepared, I think there has been efforts being made in multiple plans in the last decade or so, be it Mumbai, Bangalore, Delhi, where there were opportunities for consultation. And how should we be planning? Are land use decisions really driven by data? Is something that is a question. And the other question is, has flexible or one size fits all kind of DCRs worked in our context? And then land use planning sometimes does not consider land ownerships, for instance, government lands, which can be leveraged for creating open spaces or amenities or even affordable housing, for instance, right? So I mean, it's really difficult to sometimes to even get this information on this layer on your base map. And the need for stronger link to projects and budgets, and I think that's something master plans don't really do really well. Where I mean, being able to bring all the stakeholders together in the city and then work towards implementation of projects that benefits the city, and then attaching budgets to that to actually implement. Um, so what should planning documents entail? Most times it misses out on the larger vision for the city, which is inclusive. Has it really turned out to become a tool just to provide building permissions, or does it have something for citizens, all citizens, or just certain land users, land owners, or builders? And finally, what's the kind of city that has resulted out of all of this? So most cities we will see, like at least Bangalore, Mumbai, many of these cities, you see uncontrolled sprawl and peripheries which are quickly urbanizing with limited infrastructure. And with that limited infrastructure, you see in the peripheries the rise of gated communities where they kind of, to make up for the lack of infrastructure, stay in these communities which provide them all the amenities and infrastructure that the planning system has not been able to do. And of course, informal settlements as well, especially along natural systems and government lands, etc. There is an affordable housing crisis in most of our cities. And I think our markets also kind of push people out to the peripheries. So of course, there is an affordable housing crisis, and some context land pooling has worked well, like the Ahmedabad one. But I think in others it has not really taken off as planned. Redevelopment is also a challenge, especially in cities where you have aging building stock, which requires redevelopment. So, I mean, that's something that our cities need to seriously start looking at. And then, of course, we've not been able to create those green spaces. We don't, none, I think none of our cities meet the kind of 10 square meters or 9 square meters that URDPFI kind of, suggests. It's also a question, are we really be able to meet those? Do those standards have to be rethought? I mean, beyond the legacy open spaces that you see in the center of cities, like say, Lalbagh or Kavan Park in Bangalore, or these large spaces in central Delhi. I think if you look at East Delhi, there's very low open per capita open spaces. So how does one, look at that? So where are we headed? Is there a need for us to rethink statutory land use planning set against the background of climate change? Maybe yes. Strategy planning is most times like a ship, which is very difficult to change course on the changing needs. So I think if we are reimagining it, it needs to be something that's nimble, easy to maneuver, shorter horizons, more consultations, better data for better tech to make those fast decisions. And finally, I think city leadership is key. I don't think we can afford short-term visions, quick fixes. Do we need a kind of an elected parastatal, since the parastatals are not elected, is there a need to think of it from that point of view? So, I mean, this is where kind of, an organization like C40 comes in, where we really work closely with city leadership, and we believe, change can happen only by working with city leaders. We're about 100 cities globally, and in India, five cities, C40 cities, namely Delhi, Mumbai, Bangalore, Chennai, and Ahmedabad. We have the co-chair model, so the mayor of London and the mayor of Freetown, Aki Sawyer are co-chairs representing the North, the global North, and the South. Um, so, I mean, this is how our organization is kind of structured, and we work with cities to kind of push the ambition and the agenda of climate action, and set against this whole climate crisis that many of our cities are currently experiencing. So this is the next part of my talk, which looks at climate action planning. Uh, yeah, at this point, I don't know. Maybe I'll just go on to the next section. Um, yeah. So there are multiple cities in the last, say, 5 years that have launched their caps, climate action plans, and this is kind of a movement that's taking place in India. Many cities are now looking at this as something that helps them really address the climate risks that they are facing, and really take stock of where the cities are with respect to this, and what can we do, right? Like, and cities really want to know in the short term what actions can we take to address the uh, climate risks that cities are facing. So in C40, we have the climate action planning framework, a guidebook that really sets out the on how cities can prepare these climate action plans. So it's kind of foundation on four main pillars, I would say. One is looking at emissions, carbon emissions, and how city can work towards reducing that. Second, resilience, looking at the hazards the city face and how can build resilience to these risks. Third is looking at inclusivity, making sure that we don't leave anyone behind, and all citizens in the city are kind of taken into account for when we make these plans, and they're inclusive in nature. Fourth is about the governance and collaboration. I think without that, I think none of these plans can be implemented. So stakeholder consultation and engagement is key. So maybe I'll not get into the details of this. I mean, all of this is available on our website. So this is basically the process that we follow, where we, work with the city, get their commitment to prepare such a cap. We build the evidence, which is basically the GHG inventory and a risk assessment. We develop these plans, which are linked to targets and actions. So they are outcome based. And of course, the stakeholder engagement bit is kind of cross cutting throughout. So these are some of the parts, like I mentioned, of the baselining. One is the climate change risk assessment. This is one of the most fundamental things that any cap will have, which looks at climate risk. So, what is the hazard? Meaning it could be air pollution, flooding, heat, and what is the kind of impact, or who is vulnerable to those hazards, right? And so an understanding of that is built mainly through spatial mapping, and then we develop a GHG inventory for the city, which is again looking at sectors like energy consumption, transport, the kind of fuel we use, and three, of course, waste management, meaning how much of our waste is segregated, how much goes to the landfill, what's the kind of emissions from that. And then what we do is we build a kind of a modeling to say, okay, now if our emissions increase as in different scenarios, what is it going to really be in terms of risks, etc. So that is assessed, and we kind of develop a model where we say, okay, we need to take these actions in the short term to reduce our emissions, and then in the long term, these are the kind of activities that we need, or actions or projects we need to look at in the long term. So that kind of modeling is also built into this climate action plans. Now to the next section on the need to integrate climate action planning into land use planning. I mean, I think folks in this call or sitting in this room, I don't think I have to really convince you, but I mean, in the recent IPCC 2022 report, it was mentioned that we need to start adopting better urban planning models that can help us reduce our emissions. So compact, mixed use, transit oriented is the way to go about. And defining climate mainstreaming in itself. So climate mainstreaming is the systematic integration of climate commitments and considerations into governance and decision making to institutionalize climate action, um, to institutionalize action on climate change. So basically, there are many tools through which you can mainstream. It can either be into your master plan, onto your city budget, or into the city building bylaws, or into any disaster risk management kind of protocols that you have in place. So all of these, various city tools, statutory tools can be really, an important or a kind of a really strategic way for you to mainstream into, climate into your day-to-day workings of how, you manage or develop the city. So, I mean, it's for multiple reasons, I think climate is critical institutional to have sustainable institutions, cyclical nature of your statutory or, your budgeting, etc. And creating those collaborative kind of, platforms where various stakeholders can work together. And this also helps lead to, behavioral change. And mainstreaming is essential to deliver the ambitious targets that the city sets out. To move from planning to implementation of climate actions, I think mainstreaming is critical. Now coming to Chennai, so the work that we are doing with CMDA is under the C40 Community Jameel Labs. So it's a land use planning lab that was, in collaboration with Community Jameel and C40. We have a urban management center from Ahmedabad who is helping us on the ground with many of the studies, who are partners as well on ground. So the objectives of the study, if I kind of set out. So one was to prepare a GHG inventory for the entire region. So we had till this point a climate action plan for the Greater Chennai Corporation area, which is roughly about 428 square kilometers. So, I mean, what this project aimed to do was expand that climate action plan to the entire region, which was about 1,198 square kilometers. And then what we did was do a GHG inventory as well as a climate change uh, risk assessment. And then we, based on this baseline, we developed strategies for the Chennai metropolitan area that is linked to zoning and development control regulations. So this has been the overall attempt here in this project. And it's still ongoing. So some of the things that I'm going to show you is still kind of a work in progress. I mean, it's still under a discussion with CMDA. So there are 5 parts to this. One, as I mentioned, was the baselining, which is the, the first piece to it, which had the GHG and the climate change risk assessment. After which we identified sectors and strategies. Fourth was on implementation and the modalities with respect to stakeholder responsibilities. And fifth was monitoring and evaluation. So these are the 5 pieces to it. And maybe I'll just take you through one part of it because there are multiple kind of sectors that we have looked at, both mitigation and adaptation. I'll take you mainly through the flooding part of urban flooding part. So this is the GHG inventory that we did for the CMA. About 31.44 million metric tons of CO2 was kind of calculated as part of the inventory. And 60% of this is attached to the Greater Chennai Corporation area, while the remaining 40% to the area outside of the Greater Chennai Corporation area, which is within the CMA. So, I mean, this is the kind of a pattern that you see across all cities. Stationary energy, which is basically your energy consumption, is kind of the highest, about 60 to 70% is what we see in most cities, and then followed by transport and waste management. So, transport, about 15 to 20% is what you would see, and finally, from waste, about 10%. That's the kind of profiles most cities, mega cities have. In terms of hazards, we identified about five different hazards that Chennai is prone to: flood and storm, heat, air pollution, drought, and sea level rise. These were the five hazards that we identified. Now, I will mainly take you through the flood and storm because this is a huge study, and I don't think we have the kind of time to go through it in that much detail. But this is the climate change risk assessment that was done. So, there was primary data collected for all the five identified hazards, and uh, as well as multiple layers from secondary data, secondary studies was also collected, and all of this was put together on a spatial map and analyzed. So coming to the flooding and climate vulnerability with respect to flood. So this is a kind of a flood map that was developed actually by JICA. This is a study that they did, and then we used this as a base layer and started putting multiple other layers on it. And one of the layers that we put was, for instance, the slums and locations of slums and fishing folk settlements on top of this flood layer. And what we realized was almost about 78% of the slums in Chennai are actually prone to flooding, are in flood prone areas. And about 30% are in really high flood affected areas, the dark blue that you see. So, I mean, there is a need to kind of assess I mean, these buildings in terms of what their current status is in terms of are they, pakka or kacha in nature, and then based on that, there was a need to then develop, strategies for them. So that was kind of what the process that we followed while doing the study. Um, and then after doing this for flood, we did similar analysis for all the other four hazards, and we came up with this kind of grading. Where,
Benjamin,
yeah,
can you
yeah.
just add a couple of sentences about how you arrived at those flooding maps and also the combined one, which
So this is based on a lot of modeling, GIS modeling that's done. So the DEM, the digital elevation model is considered, and based on that, you do this kind of analysis. And like I mentioned, this was done by JICA. They had another study that
oh,
was commissioned by CMDA. So we got this base layer, and then on top of this, we started putting different layers like slums or existing amenities like schools, hospitals, to assess all these infrastructures. Where are they really placed spatially in the city, right? Are they on these flood prone areas, right? And we also looked at physical infrastructure, for instance, metro lines, metro stations, and then road networks, bus stops. So all of this was assessed. So I'm just showing one, which is the slum locations, which is, I mean, they're the most vulnerable populations living in the city when it comes to flooding, and they are at high risk when some of these flooding events take place. So I mean, they use these kind of models where they model say a 1 in 100 year, a 1 in 50 year, and 1 in 20 year kind of modeling, and it's based on different uh, rainfall, the amount of rainfall. So 1 in 100 might consider say 400 mm of rainfall and then based on that, which areas will get, and so it's all GIS modeling that is used here, where the base layer is the DEM, and then you model rainfall on top of it to understand which areas are getting flooded based on how much amount of rainfall, etc. You model in, right? So that's the way this has been done. Again, disclaimer is not the base analysis is not done by us, done by JICA. So after that, we took each of these different layers like flooding, heat, air pollution, drought, and sea level rise, and really through grids we tried to understand which are the most prone areas in the city, and we gave kind of scorings to various grids based on the kind of climate vulnerabilities that each of those grids were facing, right? And then we came up with this overall spatial impact overlay, which showed all the five hazards put together and which areas are most prone to flooding. So again, this is done using GIS, analysis. Um, and I think what's been key to all of this is the stakeholder engagements. I mean, that was kind of fundamental to us. So talking to various groups, having various discussions and with various stakeholders. So we had representatives from slum locations as well, representatives from various, NGOs and RWs, etc., who are part of these consultations to understand what's the kind of risk that they are facing. Do they experience it in a day to day? What is the kind of uh, measures that they take locally to have groups that help them out in terms of any early warning systems, etc. So some of these discussions were had, and we also did these kind of scorings to understand from them, from their areas, what do they rate highest in terms of all of these hazards, right? So that those kind of exercises were kind of done. um, Now coming to the part where we next was to identify the sectors and strategies. So I will specifically talk about the first one, which was objective one, which was on that water management system, to prevent flooding. So how does one look at that? So there were actions that were identified and then recommendations, and then we tied these up to the various statutory planning scales of the city. So some things like, for instance, identification of areas for strengthening coverage and stormwater drainage needs to be addressed in a local area plan, for instance. But on the other hand, there are things like, for instance, mandating permeable surfaces in the building rules need to be looked at the development control regulation. So each of these actions were then tagged to what scales they would be implemented at, either at the local area plan or within the zoning regulations or the development control regulations, right? Um, so this was kind of, I would say, uh, starting point. So we did these for each of the sectors. There were about 6 to 7 sectors that were identified. And the kind of strategies that emerged was to look at water sensitive urban design. Like, so at a local level, at the scale of, say, a neighborhood, how do you start addressing, these areas that are prone to flooding, right? So looking at differential DCRs in flood prone areas is one way to do it. So you may need new buildings that are going to be built in these flood prone areas to have maybe on stills or create more permeable surfaces in those areas. That was one way of looking at it. On the other hand, there are a lot of slums that are in these flood prone areas. So how do you, redevelop them without really moving them from these places? So looking at models, of area development models or area planning approaches that one can take in these, slum areas that are actually prone to flooding, right? And then another one was green TDR, and this is something that it's still something that we are internally debating. And so you may have parcels of land in flood prone areas that are privately owned but are open spaces. Can we think of them giving them TDR certificates and then trading it in areas that which are receiving zones, right? Which are zones that can be developed. So thinking of it like that, but again, these are challenging stuff to do because you need to create that TDR market, and there's a lot of challenges around that. Um, so these are some of the water sensitive urban design strategies that we tried to integrate into the DCR and gave as suggestions. Finally, how do you implement this, and what roles do stakeholders play? So there are various scales of planning. So one, at the macro scale, you have obviously the master plan, which has the zoning regulations and the development control regulations, while at the local level there needs to be local area plans that are prepared, though they haven't been prepared in Chennai yet. I think this master plan will take a strong view on this. The need to actually prepare local area plans. Again, various strategies for implementation at both at the zoning, land use zoning level and the development control regulation level. Um, so, I mean, I'm not going to read all of this. I mean, I think these are things that I think all of us are aware of. Promoting rainwater harvesting, uh, creating more permeable spaces at the plot level, and uh, things like that, right? So I'm not going to get into the details of this. And finally, the monitoring and evaluation. So against each of these actions, there are targets that are set, and then we work towards actually achieving those targets. And this is again kind of a draft. This is not finalized, and these have to be discussed with the stakeholders, and really, are they kind of ready to kind of implement in this kind of a way? Or the other thing that we're thinking of is, can we think of looking at different, rather than like short term and long term, can we look at timelines in terms of, mm, at the draft stage, what steps does the development authority need to take? Once the master plan is notified, what are the first steps that you take? And then, say, in the next 2 to 3 years, what are the next steps that you take? So looking at it more in terms of the master plans planning cycles, than so this is again something that we are still debating internally. So coming to my last slide, I mean, fully kept time. So how do we look at this, going forward? What is the way forward on this? So although statutory land use planning is often seen as a tool to address urban challenges, in its current form, maybe creating more problems than it solves. So is there a need to go back to the very premise that city planning emerged from in India, right? So looking at it from a health perspective, and seeing, the sanitation, etc. So is there a need to change the very lens, and is there a need for us to go back? Is my view on this? Yeah. Thank you.
Done. That's just in time. Thank you, Benjamin. You can stay, you can keep your video on, Benjamin.
We're just having a sip of water. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I have a whole bunch of questions, in fact. That's why I kept interrupting you. But we will gather questions from around as well. Just before that, a quick clarificatory question. You started off by saying, while tracing the history of town planning in India, you mentioned that natural systems were looked as cesspools of disease. Was it some kind of, what's the kind of reference that you had? I know that it began with the sanitary concerns, the town planning way back, particularly in Mumbai in the beginning. But it is also a fact that the master planning, town planning schemes or legislations, if you take them, one of the things that it insists is preparation of this base map, delineating the water bodies within the region that we are planning for, and with an explicit goal to protect them, to protect these water bodies. So you delineate and then basically restrict any growth, sometimes even surrounding those water bodies. Or so how did it, I mean, first thing is that I wanted to understand, was there any specific reference that natural systems were seen and were sort of something that were not accorded the importance that later was given, that I'm mentioning about when they were preparing my base map? Or were you aware of any transition that has happened from treating them as cesspools or diseases to protection of these water bodies?
Sure, sure. So, I mean, with respect to water bodies, so I mean, this is something that I've seen a lot in Bangalore and Chennai. So, I mean, there's documentation by the Britishers itself in Bangalore. In the 19th century, they had documented close to 2,000 lakes and ponds, right? And then I think so. There's I think Buchanan or something. I think the Britisher who actually documented this. There are like it's well available in many books. If you look at Deccan Traverses, some of these documentation of lakes. I mean these are all well documented. So uh, and then I think post independence we saw that there are many of the maps that were created, like the uh, Survey of India maps has many of these lakes. The revenue maps have many of these lakes. But I think over time, what has happened is like, I mean, it started, I think maybe in the 50s and the 60s in Bangalore, where, your bus stand was converted into a lake. The, main Kantirva Stadium was converted into a lake. So there are many examples like this, same in Chennai. And today also you will see these areas get flooded when, these, where these lakes were, right? These get flooded today as well, because we've actually covered off that actual natural drainage, right? And there is documentation as well that shows that it was looked at a spread of malaria, etc., where these where the lakes there was a lot of mosquitoes that were around these lakes, and that thus it was looked as at the places where you have these health issues that were kind of coming up. So I mean the easiest thing to do was to cover them and create some development around. So, and I think that was the kind of thought process that you had. And now over time, looking at revenue maps as well, many revenue maps show lakes, for instance, in Bangalore, but then many of them have also got denotified. But those revenue maps again have not been updated. Like you'll still see, like I think when we were doing the RMP 2031, we realized that there were about 800 lakes still on the revenue maps. These are the 60s, revenues maps that come from the 60s and the 70s. But then many of them have been denotified through multiple notifications. And, so that's the kind of process that have been followed. So I can definitely pull out that reference of, where this was starting off to look at, they looked at it as a health hazard. And these cases, are there. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think you have raised a very important question about the way we go about. Planners. You are a planner and then practiced planning for so long. I think one of the key component is preparation of this base map. And I would love to hear you talk about, if at all you had tried to look into how some of these water bodies that were identified or otherwise delineated were later denotified. What were the kind of processes through which they got denotified? That would have been an interesting study. In fact, one of the things that came across in these series of talks was that there are these two positions. Is that, as about the question with which you have closed the presentation, about whether we need to reimagine the statutory master planning and its tools, and we add and we keep questioning even the very rationalities of the tools themselves that we deploy to prepare master plan. One position is that we must radically reimagine or relook at these tools that we use. The other position is that there is no need for that kind of radical repositioning of these tools. But it is possible if you creatively and sensibly apply these tools to achieve these objectives. It is possible to pursue these objectives of even the later objectives of these climate change related concerns. These are the two positions that we saw emerging out of this talk series. And I think there is a need to explore further about how far can we deploy these. And one of them happens to be deploy these in such a way that we can address these concerns, emerging concerns related to water, environment, and climate change. One of the, at least for me, it looks like the fundamental element that is involved in statutory master plan preparation is the base map preparation. And I just wanted to, I know you may not be, you may have constraints about being candid about it, but I want you to respond to this question about how much of the effort was involved in preparing the actual base map for Chennai, in preparing the in preparing the revised master plan, or otherwise the next master plan for 2041. That is one. Second one is, I think, if you could also share some familiarity, if you have, about the redrafting of the town planning legislation that is there to accommodate climate change concerns related to that. And then we will take up these questions that are coming up online, if you could respond to them.
Sure, sure. So maybe base map, I can just talk from my experience with Bangalore, which was quite detailed. Actually, we had done GIS mapping for to where we digitized the revenue maps and we digitized satellite maps both, right? And we also realized there are a lot of differences on what is on ground with respect to satellite images and what is on ground with and what is there in the revenue maps. So one many people have contested revenue maps. These are, the legality of revenue maps itself is something that we can maybe have a separate discussion on, right? So these are things that I think emerged maybe when we started, I think with the great survey that was done, and then post that, we started creating our own revenue maps when we became, a independent country. So things like, the village roadways, the cartways, the pond, I mean the grazing land. These are the kind of layers that you will see in a village map, right? So
Revenue,
in
revenue
today's
map.
day and age, the relevance of that, is there a need to actually integrate the what's on ground and what's in the revenue map to really create something that's more realistic, is something, that I would definitely put it out there, because there's a lot of contestation within revenue maps, right? And I think, and as we move towards
How
digital,
much of ground truthing happened? I mean, either through surveys, formal surveys, or otherwise visits.
yeah, formal surveys, GPS locations, getting it as accurate as possible. I mean, a lot of it was done, and in fact, we even created an entire 3D of the city for Bangalore. I mean, there was an entire three-dimensional, thing done for the city, and a DM done and all of that done, right? So, um, I think that the question here is, how does one look at this, revenue maps from a legal standpoint, right? And how much of uh, the on ground versus what's on the revenue maps, how much do they really match, or how much do they differ, and then what do we go by, right? And most times there's a lot of legal issues on land parcels, etc. That may be, where they contest that there isn't a lake there, or there isn't a drain there, but the revenue map shows it on ground that it isn't there. They're slowly getting it, creating a road on top of it. So many of these issues, are there on ground, and I think we need to uh, be able to really, one, create a base map that's agreeable to both landowners and to the folks who give building permissions. And the second part to it, I would say, is that we need to create existing land use maps as well to really document what does the city look like today. And we did it in Bangalore, but I think the Delhi Act does not require, if you look at the Delhi town, the DD Act, it does not require an ELU to be prepared. So, some geographies don't prepare ELUs, some do prepare ELUs. I think an ELU is also important for us to understand how is the city existing, right? And sometimes you might then realize that many of it doesn't match with what the proposed land use was. There are many changes on ground. So maybe sometimes it's not done to also bring out those contestations that are already there on ground. So much of this is heavily contested, on the legality of revenue versus what's on ground versus, so I mean, I'm not a expert on the legality part of this, but I think there is a need for us to revise our revenue maps to ground realities. Because even people who give building permissions find it difficult because sometimes what's on ground and what's in the revenue map don't match. So somewhere then that needs to be, and as we move towards digitizing our properties, and these are things that Bangalore is attempting to do now, right? To make your, katas, which is your ownership, digitizing some of this, I think will, and putting it out in public will, I think, create, bring in more transparency and yeah, and then that larger thing of, do statutory or parastatals need to be elected representative? Are they answerable to the people or not is also the larger thing. So once they start putting these out, they will get a lot of questions. So that is something that we'll have to see how that works in terms of, do we have to merge the ULB and the development authority into one body that then looks at entire city management and city planning together, or does this have to be two separate bodies? Is also currently the way it's imagined. I don't know how well that works. So yeah.
Well,
If I can validate, we did a lot of existing land use grant routing. I was working with Benjamin only and going to the site and see whether those are actually the same.
so here is someone, a former colleague responding to you.
Yeah, yeah,
No, I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
I was just telling that we actually did a lot of ground truthing because a lot of those datas were eventually fed to the GIS and making whether those, like, what are the contradictions with the existing land use and what the ground was speaking of. So I think in couple of lakes, there were a lot of issues, if I remember correctly, way back in 2017, that those were marked lake in the revenue maps, but when we went and did the ground truthing, there was a completely very different scenario altogether. So I think even WRI did a short on this. So yeah, that's clarified.
Your responses actually raise more questions for me, but I think I can ask you separately. But we have a whole bunch of questions here from those who joined us today. So the first one is from Ajay Katuri. This is about, for the greenfield cities, implementing the climate agenda is easier. Uh, I'm not so sure it is so easier, but that's what he thinks. However, for brownfield cities, how do we intervene with the green components in courts for reducing the emissions? I think you understand that language.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So, I mean, I think the way we'll have to look at it is through very strategic projects. I mean, in these brownfield cities, right? Like urban transformation, how do we look at that at a brownfield level? And uh, what we used to initially think of as conservative surgery. I mean, that's the approach we'll have to take in terms of specifically looking at the area level. How is it that I can intervene? Either it could be increasing greening through looking at, you say, buffer areas of lakes, or looking at, say, space under the flyover. So I mean, it has to be a very tactical kind of urban design approach that one needs to look at in the urban, and in already developed areas, or improving walkability, cycling, some of these things. So at the local level, when this gets translated, it's basically your, reducing your energy consumptions, like looking at solar. How can at the rooftop, building level, how can one adopt rooftop? So one project we are doing with Bangalore BBMP now is actually to look at their municipal buildings, like all the government buildings, and see how that can be transitioned to solar. So some of these, low hanging tactical approaches is what we'll have to take at a ward level, or at a very dense, level. So I think it will require a mix of urban design and planning, and that conservative surgery, kind of an approach. Yeah.
Okay. The second question is about the mixed land use that you mentioned about. While introducing this IPCC report, compact, mixed use, and transit oriented. I think that was what is recommended. The question is from Surya Jidigunta, who's asking how can we have mixed zones in the master plan to reduce commute times and emissions using public transportation? And what finance tools or instruments that we can deploy to implement this climate resilient infrastructure?
So I think it's quite a loaded question. So, I mean, looking at TOD, I mean, there are two ways you can look at it. One, again, in the greenfield areas, and another in the brownfield, existing areas. And the existing areas, I mean, plot amalgamation, some of these things are the challenge. I mean, it's very difficult maybe to get that kind of plot sizes that you may need, to really consume higher FSIs, right? So I mean, so then I think, in the newly developing parts of the city, where there is, there is potential to densify. I think the master plan needs to identify those zones, and that then becomes your receiving zones, right, for even TDR and things like that. And that's where I think one can densify meaningfully around the metro corridors, wherever the metro corridors are coming in those greenfield areas. That's one way. In brownfield, I think one way is that one can look at it is obviously station accessibility, improving, your walkability, access to metro stations, all of that. The one interesting exercise we did I mean, this is slightly off, maybe off the topic, but in Delhi, as part of the Delhi master plan, we did something called a public transport accessibility level. So we really tried to understand across Delhi what is the level of accessibility to public transport, right? And then we proposed areas with higher public transport accessibility then has reduced parking, in the new buildings that come up in those areas. Provide reduced park. If you have good access to public transport, then you can reduce your parking norms there. You can densify there. So I mean, TOD has always been structured in a way that your road network is what defines how much you can densify. But I would flip it the other way and say, I mean, your public transport accessibility should be what then defines how much you can densify areas with better access to public transport, more say bus stops, metro stations, places where metros intersect can really be areas where you can really densify and then so I think looking at it through that lens is again important to so I think we can't just look at road networks now. We have to look at also public transport and the accessibility to that, and then that then define what kind of densities you have, how much affordable housing you have. So I mean, that's another issue, this affordable housing thing, where many cities have said, okay, 10% of your plot should be affordable housing, but finally those have never really not maybe at the most in Ahmedabad, where they have this SP Ring Road, they have identified that as a affordable housing belt. But other than that, I think other cities, that 10% finally gets gobbled up, I think, by the builder, or maybe I don't know. It finally doesn't get assigned it to affordable housing. So, I mean, there's need to also relook at that. Are we really, able to provide affordable housing for cities? And how do we do that? And one of the things we did in Bangalore was try to get the government lands and see in the city where can we kind of promote these kind of mixed use development where there is some amount of affordable housing, accessibility to public transport, etc., in the city itself on government lands. But again, that was again a very difficult exercise because just getting that information was a challenge. Yeah.
Uh, Maybe this question is a bit more specific than the earlier question. So this is from Kirit Parikh. After you have taken the steps to deal with the hazards, the risk pattern will change. Do you have maps that compares before and after vulnerability?
Can
The once you provide for coping with the risks or the hazards, the vulnerability that you have produced, once you provide for it, it's likely that they would change over time. That's what I think he means. The risk pattern will change. Did you try to sort of had a chance? I mean, in your I think you've worked on several master plans. Did you ever have a chance to compare how you provided and how the patterns have changed over time?
So I think that's a very good question, and I think something that maybe I'll take a note of, and this is something that I haven't, really looked at really in terms of the before and after, right? Like, so you're saying if certain controls come in, or you take certain approaches to addressing the
See, you have, I think the question is like this. I think you have produced that vulnerability map, right?
yeah,
And then you propose certain kind of interventions
yeah.
as per the vulnerability map or the risk that you have mapped. Um, Once you provided for mitigating those risks, over time, that risk pattern might change. Have you had a chance to monitor it? I think that's the question.
No, frankly, no. I haven't been, part of a
The,
project, and I think maybe that's a new way of looking at how one can structure projects, right? Like the before and after. So once we,
since you have been there in that space for in doing this climate action plan, if you had a chance to do it, but I have an associated question about it, and that is more to do with the structure of the statutory planning in Indian cities. One is that do you, now that you have prepared for master plans for Delhi, Bangalore, and Chennai, and these are for 2031, 2041, I think the next one would be 2051. So, I mean, given the fact that this kind of dynamic nature of the climate change risks that you see, and at least the question that was raised, do you think that there is a case for reconsidering the horizon for planning, or the one way is that you reduce the horizon, the planning horizon time frame. The other way is to increase the or improve the agility and responsiveness of the institutions to accommodate these risks. Which way do you lean? And if it is both ways, and how do you, can you just share your thoughts about it?
yeah, sure. So I think maybe just going to the previous question, something that came to mind was, I think in terms of measuring how things have changed, right? Improvements with respect to hazards. So I think it can be easily done in air quality. So for instance, I mean, if you have an area that has poor air quality and you take measures there, right? Certain measures where you restrict vehicles, or you, for instance, I mean, create pedestrian areas, restrict vehicles. So there, measuring before and after is very easy because you have these sensors that can easily measure what the air quality was, and it's very objective versus a flooding which may not be so objective as this, because there are chances that sometimes lakes can also expand, contract, change with seasons, etc. But I think the objectivity of the echo. Just give me a second.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, sorry. So, I mean, there, I think, in air quality, it's more objective. And we are trying this now with Bangalore and Chennai. We're trying to see how we can identify clean air zones in the city, similar to, say, what they've done in London. There's a program called Breathe London, very successful one, where they've been actually been able to objectively, bring down the level of air pollution in the city, and through sensors and things like that. And in vulnerable areas, for instance, where there are schools, hospitals, where you have vulnerable populations, right? Bringing down air pollution there, those kind of areas really, is how this breeds cities. I would, request you to look, maybe folks in this call, to actually go back and look at that program called Breed City. So I mean, we're trying something similar. We're trying to see how we're navigating still. We're trying to see how certain restrictions can be brought in some areas which have poor air quality, and then measure it. So, I mean, that's on that. And then I think the other one was on the planning horizons, right? The question on that, and I think you had previously also asked the question about how does uh, pre-planning, is it short term, medium term, how should be really structured, right? Like, and so I would definitely feel, you need a long term vision. I mean, these long term visions we may not be able to achieve in 5 years, but I think the plan definitely needs to be revised, I think every 3 to 5 years. Definitely we need to. And right now it's 20 years, so we prepare it, and that's the end of it, and then we look at it after 20 years. But I think we cannot set it in stone like that, because our cities are quite dynamic and changing, every moment. So I think there is a need for us to look at more long-term visions, but short-term kind of planning, and revising the plans on a regular basis, and also translating from a master plan to a local area plan is also something that's important at the local area. And in Bangalore, what we had done, we had aligned the planning district or the planning boundaries with the ward boundaries. And when you actually do that, what you're then doing is promoting participatory planning, right? Your actual planning boundaries are then aligning with your ward boundaries. And when that happens, then there are opportunities for you to go down to the ward level and say, okay, this is what we have planned in your ward. Does this work? Does this not work? Right? And how do we then, make a localized plan for implementation and things like that. Yeah.
So here is the question. I take it because the question is about planning horizon time frame, and you lean towards shorter planning horizon time frames, right? So, given the
Yeah.
fact that I think I see your point when you say that when you stress the importance of preparing local area plans to have more effect of, or otherwise to see the you know planning to make sense on the ground. I see that point, but given the fact that you have prepared when you prepared the Delhi master plan, that was almost 10 years back, right? Or 6 or 7 years back. And you prepared it for 2031, and we are already in 2025, and it is not yet
41,
notified. Yeah?
41, 41.
Yeah, 2041. So it's not yet notified, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, given this kind of inertia, if you want to call it, or the rigidity in the institutional processes, can you just share your thoughts about the feasibility of such a short-term horizon planning in Indian cities?
Yeah. So, I mean, I wouldn't say that when you in the short term that you would, I mean, there would be a complete overhaul of your long-term vision. I think there might be need for certain course corrections that one may need to take in terms of, I mean, just certain projects, I mean, in terms of the projects and finances. So I think when you break the master plan down into projects, that's when I think one has to then start reviewing it in the short term to see, okay, where are we with those projects? I don't think I'm saying that we need to completely overhaul that long-term vision, or your land uses that are planned, or the development control regulations. I think that's one way, but the other way that one needs to look at it is also in terms of what kind of projects that one needs to do, and how in the short term. These are, most of them would be short-term projects, right? So how do you then start reviewing those to see, do they actually meet the overall vision that one had set out to achieve, right? So does that, because I mean, even when you make these plans, right, things change as you plan, right? So for
That's the
instance,
point that I was making.
yeah, so to give you an example, we were doing this heritage mapping, and we realized we did the documentation or the mapping, and within 6 months some of those buildings were not there on ground. So things are rapidly changing on ground, right? And for instance, I plan a road network, I might realize in 6 months parts of the road network are built on already, right? I may not be able to achieve that alignment that I have drawn on the map. So I think these kind of situations that come up where it does not allow you to implement the plan, then you need to have some course corrections that need to be done to actually make the plan implementable, because things are changing on ground at a very fast pace. At every 6 months to a year, there are massive changes happening in, say, a city like Mumbai, Bangalore, Chennai, Delhi. These are fast growing cities, right? People, maybe in Delhi, 3 to 5 lakh people are coming in every day, right? So, I mean, there's that kind of flux that's happening in the city. So, in that case, how does one plan? And also, is the scale to then do that planning the city level, or the local area plan is also, a question that will emerge. You might have to make some of those changes not at the city level plan, but at the local level, that needs to be, looked at.
Well, I see your repeated distinction between vision and plan. And, it's partly, obviously, there must be a certain rationality for in the earlier legislations as well, for defining this longer term horizon. I think, at least for me, it is more to avoid co-optation of the planning process, or otherwise sabotaging of the plan itself by these various interests. That is probably the reason why it was made so rigid and for such a longer term plan. But certainly it is to translate the plan always. The idea is that plan becomes a pathway for the vision, and basically translating that. I think that you could probably respond to this question that I was trying to raise with this. The next question by BP Singh is about, could you please throw light on why governments or local bodies or town planners are keeping their eyes closed, somewhat provocative, to the rampant unauthorized construction ongoing all over the country and turning it into chaos? I mean, it's basically in a way, it's more about the negative impacts, or otherwise negative outcomes of maybe longer term horizon, or weak institutional structures.
Yeah, so I think this is also, I mean, I need to look at the political economy of the city, right? So, I mean, some things are also beyond the land use plan, right? Like, how many people actually know that there exists a land use plan? So, I mean, many of the folks who come in from, travel from villages and set up in the city. I mean, that's the kind of pattern of urbanization that we see, right? How many of them know that there is a land use plan, right? So, I mean, they might just buy a piece of land and then just start developing it themselves, right? So, uh, uh, how how much do citizens know? How much have we engaged for citizens to know that there is a master plan in place is one thing. And the second point, that, I mean, there is this kind of informality, or because of the lack of affordable housing that, we've not been able to create, right? I mean, so the land markets have just priced many people out of it. So, I mean, then you have to look at squatting and things where, you are not able to access the formal land markets because of high prices, etc., right? um, and that also in a turn, in a sense, leads to, major sprawl that happens, right? People are moving far and far away from the city where they can afford land, right? So, it's a question about affordability as well there. I mean, this kind of illegal development is also a question about how affordable our land markets or housing is. And the third point I would say is the whole political economy again, right? You have policies that then help you legalize informal development, right? Like I mentioned, change of land use, or there was something called akrama sakrama, where you pay some betterment levy. In this is in Karnataka, where you just pay that betterment levy, and then, betterment charges levy, and then you get a, formalized kind of a uh, so uh, it's also the view, where somehow I would say uh, the political economy and planning has never been able to take into consideration the political economy of the city. And that may be the biggest failure of planning, right? So unless you start really taking into consideration that these aspects of informal housing, slums, that kind of, or mixed use, for instance, right? uh, that kind of, if we don't take that into consideration while we plan, then we will end up just, uh, I would say, catering to certain 5% of elite landowners, builders, etc., which actually finally master plans have turned out to be, right? It's just catering to a small percentage of the population who have access to certain resources like land, or things like that. So I mean, it's a failure of the urban planning system in itself. And I think that's where, I mean, the entry point to for us to look at it from the current climate crisis is a good entry point for us to look at it and say that there are vulnerable populations in the city, and we need to look at how they are housed and how they are, so I mean, that's kind of what I would say on that.
Okay. You have a question? Okay, we can come back to the room and then take questions from around. Yeah.
Sorry, I had a question because you mentioned about Benjamin, the drainage master plan. So I think a month back there was this article on like how Delhi's drainage master plan that was actually prepared before the Delhi's master plan, the draft of 2023. And there was this, like, I think a very strong argument on in it happened in Bombay, that how the 25 to 50 drain, the drainage is unable to, the drainage system of the cities is unable to sort of solve. So there is this discussion that the master plan or the statutory master plan and the drainage master plans are often very disjointed. So I think you also mentioned about that you did a drainage master plan analysis under the climate action plan, and you did the 30%, 40%, those performance indicator. So what do you think is like the key challenge with respect to one, that whether the drainage master plan is unable to function because of the lack of infrastructure finance, that not enough drainage networks are being connected, or you would say that it is not being able to keep pace with how the city is growing, or maybe the way the master plans and the land use is responding to the master plan. So I think, what kind of disjoint do you see in sort of talking this about the drainage master plan that are often prepared in most of these bigger cities simultaneously or before or after the master plan? Yes.
Added question to that. Do you also think, to address this problem, that we need to relook at the methods and approaches for designing the sewage planning, sewerage in the cities?
Yeah, so I one, I think there is finance for upgradation of drainage systems. Like, I mean, the World Bank, I mean, ADB, I think, is was doing a huge project in Chennai on upgradation of the drainage, in certain areas that are getting flooded. And I think it has shown results. Like, I mean, going back to the previous question, right? So, are there, I mean, after you take take certain steps, or, implement projects, what is the kind of, so I think the recent floods, the central Chennai didn't get flooded as much as previously, because they did some, projects to upgrade the drainage system. And similarly in Bangalore, I think World Bank has stepped in now to also improve, So I think these big banks are providing, MDBs are providing funding to cities to upgrade their drainage system. I think that's not a challenge, but I think maybe the challenge is in how we use these tools, translating that uh, um, drainage analysis, right? Or the analysis that's done of the drainage, translating that to land use something. Sometimes, I mean, it does not fully, I would say, translation from drainage analysis does not fully translate into a land use plan. And there are issues for us to translate that, so for instance, again, going back to the Bangalore case, we had done this primary, secondary, tertiary drains, right? The entire drainage was identified. Primary, but you will realize that on many drainages there are a lot of developments that have come up already. So how do you then, is demolition the only way out? Because in Bangalore, you must have seen in the news, as soon as there is a flooding. Next day, they all go out and start demolishing buildings that are on the train, and that goes on for a few weeks, and then we're back to. So I mean, so it goes back to the whole question of how does one prepare that base map and then translate that to the land use plan, right? And there are contestations in terms of development on top of drains, development on top of lakes. How does one address that? I mean, what kind of, is it a tabula rasa approach that one takes, or do you take a kind of conservative surgery approach, right? Do we take a horseman approach to it? Do we actually demolish the whole thing? Do we have to go back to a horseman approach, that what he did for Paris? Or do we take, I mean, a conservative approach in planning? Um, that was, I think, Patrick Geddes, right? So is it the Patrick Geddes approach, or school of thought, ideology that we follow, or is it the horseman ideology that we follow? Right now, we are confused.
No, we are interested in C40 ideology.
Sometimes we're taking the horseman ideology, and then sometimes we take Patrick Getty's ideology, so approach to it. So um I think that's I think the major challenge, in how does one integrate it into land use planning is a challenge. And I think there's no two ways about it. And sometimes these decisions of the horseman or the Geddes is taken quickly in a haste, in a meeting room, in a second these decisions are taken. So do we have enough data, or do we have enough analysis for them to take those informed decisions, is also a question, because sometimes these models are developed sitting at a certain scale. It's important to also come down and to the ground, to 1 in 100 or 1 in 500, and then really look at what's on the ground, and it might be very different from what's showing you at the city level. So
Right. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your dilemmas. Any other questions from the room before we go back to the online questions? So the next question is Kartikeya Mishra. In the flood risk assessment, how prominent to the flooding is the contribution of land use changes? I think that is over the past decades, changes over the past decades, as compared to the rest of the factors like rainfall intensity, surface built coverage, vegetation cover, etc. I think he meant that surface built coverage. So basically, how does land use change contribute to flooding? I think that is a key, which you have mentioned, covered in your presentation, I think.
yeah. So I mean, some of the decisions that we take, right, without maybe like I mentioned, there was a phase of planning in India that was not so aware, or did not really look at natural systems that as something that would help you build resilience, right? And then I think at that point the idea was to quickly urbanize, create those road networks that one requires, right? So I mean, just where I stay in Bangalore, just a few kilometers from here, there is a major arterial road that actually goes over an existing lake, and that lake is not there on ground, but it's there in the revenue maps. And every time it floods, and sorry, every time it rains, that road floods, right? So there are cases like this in most of our cities, where areas that were once natural systems are flooding today. So I mean, those were decisions that were made at a time that we really did not respect natural systems, right? And I mean, things have changed now. We are now trying to see how we can improve the natural drainage, create those lost links between lakes and drains. So there's a lot of work happening in our cities to really get those links back. Yeah, I mean, and this is just kind of a wild thought. So if we look at Bangalore, right, like most of the city was full of these natural systems, right, like lakes and these drains. What would have happened, like if we really conserved all of them? Would we have seen the Bangalore that we see today? Is also something that, sometimes is a question that comes to my mind, right? The IT capital and all of that. So, I mean, it's a big dilemma, right? Like, would we really have had this kind of mega development in the city if we conserved all the 800 lakes that were there? uh, what kind of a settlement would it have been, right? I mean, it's a good exercise that one could have done, can do in maybe a studio where you say, okay, now imagine a Bangalore with all the 800 lakes and you map that, and then what kind of land use pattern then can that one can have, with all those lakes and buffers in place, right?
Well, if you end up doing that studio, please let us know. We'll be very interested. So the next question is from Akhila Sivadas. This is about, you have done quite a bit of detailed vulnerability and risk assessment. I think you skipped the part about what were your specific recommendations from the point of land use and I think infrastructure, the master plan in general. Say Chennai.
Yeah. I mean, can you just repeat the question? I was just,
This is, after having done that very detailed risk assessment,
yeah,
which you showed the maps of,
yeah.
what were the kind of land use? I think you did cover it about how you were revisiting the DCRs for those that are flooded and those. I think that was covered in your presentation.
Yeah, yeah. I
What
mean,
were
I
the-
mean, the need to look at differential I mean, so far the kind of DCRs we have had is based on the road networks, and this could be road networks in any part of the city, right? So if you have a 45-meter road, I mean, this is how much you can consume, maybe for 2 FSI in this kind of a plot size. That's been in general the imagination of most of our DCRs so far, right? It's all based on it's not based on that particular context, but just based on the kind of road widths that are available to you in that site, right? So the need to look at areas based on the kind of climate risks that they face, right? And then you plan your DCRs, or you plan the kind of development that you promote based on that. So in a flood prone area, I might look at, say, stilt, buildings on stilts, and the still could be used for parking, right? But then again, how does one roll this out is also the question, right? I mean, these are maybe lower income settlements. They may not have that kind of funds to develop their houses, or when they want to build a new house, do they have that kind of accessibility to funds to build houses that are on stilts? So those are the kind of questions that are emerging, and I think what one needs to really look at is really kind of consultative processes in developing these areas, right? And I mean, it cannot be just through one notification of the master plan, but it requires multiple on-ground consultations, SOPs, on how does one then actually roll out these kind of DCRs in these differential DCRs in specific areas. So, I mean, just putting out a notification and then people things going haywire, I think it needs certain amount of consultations with local people, getting their feedback, asking them if this will work. So, I mean, do we have that level of consultation is also something a big question, because in general, master plans are like broad brushes, right? So, um, yeah.
So we are past the time, is it? But still, there are actually quite a couple of very interesting questions. The other questions, I think, because they missed out your presentation or others, at least those portions that are relevant to the questions, I would encourage them to look up when this video is uploaded on the CPR YouTube channel. So here is the question from Partha Mukhopadhyay about who you were asking about. Do you have any examples where building permissions are used to update the existing land use on a dynamic basis?
So I think, I mean, just to talk about the current situation, I think most of the town planning departments in the city corporations have digitized the whole process itself of applying for building permissions, land use permissions, etc. So that's one on one hand that's happened. Like I mean, that's I think a welcome change where now you have to respond to building permission requests within say a certain amount of days and things like that. So I mean, in that front, yeah, there is definitely uh, a change. But in terms of the dynamism of existing land use, I think that's where like having a live model of the city, right? And as and when you give building permissions, it gets tagged to that particular building, and you can see that. So I think having these 3Ds done of the city, right, where you have a 3D done and people are able to access it, and maybe the town planning officer clicks on that building and says, okay, I mean, this is the kind of setbacks he needs to leave. You check it against that, and then as you give that permission, then that the information is updated in that, right? Like they have received permission for so and so land use. This is the kind of building that they're building. So I mean, these imaginations exist, but the implementation of it is the challenge, right? And I think I mean, as Indians, I think we are very good at making plans, but very not very good at implementing them. So, I mean, I think our focus now needs to shift towards implementation of master plans and not really the preparation of them. I mean, I think we're all good at planning, making good plans, but I mean, we where we fall short is the implementation of these plans. And as we kind of take a more multi-sectoral and a consultative approach is when I think we would be really be able to really implement something, because good cases of implementation are those where stakeholders have really worked together. I mean, so it calls also for us to strengthen local planning. The need to do that is more louder than ever. I mean, it's ironic that we still, we refer to the 74th Constitutional Amendment even after 30 years, but I think there is a need to still strengthen planning. It's still pretty much top down. We'll have to strengthen, look at ways in which we can strengthen bottom up planning and bring in more tech into planning in terms of, the permissions and the way you look at the city itself in terms of, land uses is something that, yeah, there's a lot of scope for us to.
Right.
Uh,
Right. Thank you. So there are other questions, but I think these two questions, because we are coming close to, we are actually past the time. Um, these two questions perhaps are the best way to close this talk. These are from Pushpa Pathak, is our colleague here. She has two questions. One is planning has come a long way from predominantly sanitation-oriented land use planning to climate change risk ready master plans. Do you think that climate risk sensitive plans can be made without any changes in the current master planning legislation?
yeah. So I mean that I mean, I didn't get a chance to talk about our work with the Town and Country Planning Department in Tamil Nadu. So we've been working, as you're aware, with CRDF, Shashwat sir, and others to look at the town country planning regulations and see what changes are required in order to prepare these climate sensitive master plans. So to broadly, summarize, to tell you some of the recommendations that have emerged is one, to include in the baselining itself some of these, risk assessments, GHG inventories. These are things that, we need to start looking at going forward. And to translate this into strategies and into, actual zoning and, DCR. So, I mean, in terms of the zoning regulations and DCRs, uh, I don't think there's too much, because you're aware that these town and country planning acts are some things that we cannot easily change, right? These are actually acts or laws that are prepared, and amending them is not so easy, right? Yeah, making major overhauls to them is not so easy. And that goes back to your previous question. Do we actually amend these acts completely? Is there a need for a complete overhaul, or do we navigate the existing processes of planning as we do them, right? Like you are. So nothing stops me from doing these baseline studies. I think what acts do, I'm also of the opinion acts actually just prescribe the minimums, right? And you can decide the maximums in terms of in a baselining, I want to do a risk assessment, I want to do a GHG inventory, etc., etc., etc. So I think that flexibility is what the acts provide you, but bringing in some of these terms like resilience, bringing in some of the terms like a risk assessment, then kind of helps you scale these things to an entire, is in the state. So I think minimal changes are required in the acts, but I wouldn't say a complete overhaul, but it's kind of minimal changes in terms of bringing in certain terms, even in the definitions, right? Or bringing in, because I think in terms of process, I think the processes are clear. I don't think there's any complete change to the process of planning itself, right? I mean, not other than maybe bringing in consultations at a certain a stage while you're preparing, addressing or considering certain land uses like say a mixed use or say a sponge space. I think these are things that can come within say an existing like an open space. Under that you can have for instance a sponge space, or you can have for instance uh, 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 a zone where you if you want to put up a solar plant, so can that come into your zoning regulation? So I think some of these things can be brought in, but I wouldn't say there is a need for a complete overhaul of town and country planning acts in its current form, because it's a overarching kind of framework and it's up to you. It's based on the ideology of the planner or whoever the planner is is how you approach the planning exercise in itself. So when Mr. Anshul Mishra was there, I mean, the kind of dynamism we saw at CMDA was really, out of the way. And that's where I would say we need like, Jamie Lerner that Kuritiba had, right? We need those kind of leaders who understand, the subject of planning itself to be leading some of these, development authorities. And a huge, massive change in the approach itself was seen when you have these kind of, dynamic, officers leading these development authorities. So I, again, to conclude, I would say, I wouldn't say
No,
that.
there is one more question. So
Okay.
from Pushpa Pathak.
Yeah. So I would
This
say
is a lot more challenging. Yeah, sure. If you want to complete the first one.
no complete overhaul, but I would say the approaches depend on the planner and the planning authority itself, because I think the frameworks that you have, the acts that you have are you can kind of interpret it the way you want and bring in things that you feel will kind of improve the way the city is planned and functions. Yeah.
So the next question, which could be more challenging, is that you raised a very big urban governance question about the status of the parastatal agencies that even the 74th Constitutional Amendment Act could not resolve. What is the way forward, assuming that the same situation will remain?
I mean, these are very big questions that maybe we should have a separate discussion. All of us should, contribute. Maybe this is something that maybe many people can come in, maybe just not just me. If others would like to come in on this as well, because this is the big question. You know, each one of us might have some, I would say response or a kind of thought on this. It might be just thoughts, but I don't think I have something very conclusive to say on this topic. Maybe we could go around the room and end on this one. I mean, if you
I wish we can do it, but I don't think we have that kind of time at the moment. I think the best way that you could respond is that you are in this very unique position where you're working with a CMDA, right, which is a parastatal agency. You're working now on a master plan, and then you are advocating for certain climate change concerns to be accommodated in that. I think if you could produce a great documentation of this process, highlighting both technological as well as institutional and structural challenges, the way you mentioned about land use and DCRs, how they can be creatively applied, or otherwise they're a kind of creative constraints as well. For you to accommodate these, I think that would be a huge contribution, particularly because you are there and then sort of working with these parastatal agencies to make this work. I think that itself would advance our understanding about how much we need to relook at the statutory master planning process. So, with that, thank you again. Unless you have other remarks to share, any other reflections about it, do you?
Yeah, maybe just one last point. I think I think the whole uh, approach to planning needs to be rethought from one, obviously the climate change and risk perspective, but also in scales of planning, right? So what you see at 1 in 10,000 is very different from 1 in 1,000, right? The kind of issues and challenges that one sees at different scales, is very different. So I mean, I would probably conclude by saying that there needs to be more things done to promote localized planning and strengthen the local planning initiatives. Many cities have shown the I would say that the new wave of citizenship that's coming in, where you have strengthened RWAs, our MTAs, whatever market trader associations. There are various groups that are coming forward during such exercises. So I would say, I mean, this needs to be a kind of a cyclical and ongoing process. It may not end at, say, the end of the master plan, but I think there needs to be these groups or engagements that continue, and development authorities, I think, should not close their doors. I mean, they generally don't want to take questions because the very fact that they're not elected. So, I mean, maybe there one I would say, align your master planning boundaries with the ward boundaries, and then strengthen localized planning through that one very act. Two, I would say, merge. There is a need to merge the development authority maybe with the ULB, and then make it an elected body, right? And because I think they have served their purpose in maybe that 1 or 2 decades that they created the Jayanagars and the Ananagars and the I mean, now I think it's mainly private development that's happening in our cities, right? It's privately developed cities. There is not too much scope for large government layouts to be planned. So I think maybe they should be merged with the ULB. ULB in many cases give building permissions. So I mean, I would say bring them under the elected body, and I would say that's the way to go forward.
Well, that itself is a big recommendation, and I hope you had thought through it. And then, if you have developed an elaborate argument about it, I think we would like you to come back and then share your thoughts about that particular issue itself. Is about how we should go about and why we should go about merging these ULBs and the elected, the parastatals.
So I think Bangalore is kind of toying with that with this new GBA Act, right? Greater Bangalore Act. So let's see how things finally pan out. But it still kind of is controlled from the top down, where the deputy chief minister is kind of the head of this.
You have said it what I was going to say. Not just the deputy chief minister. Is it not the chief minister who is heading the GBA? The proposed. Is it proposed yet?
Yeah, it's being
Chief minister.
implemented now. Yeah, it's
So,
being implemented now. Yeah, but we'll have to see how it finally transpires on ground in terms of,
yeah,
I
I
mean,
think we have had examples of those kind of experiences earlier, but I think the bigger challenge is about this whole spirit of the question that Pushpa has raised about the 74th Constitution Amendment spirit. Is if you think that that is something that you want to look at, then the bigger question, the next question is that is it the 74th Constitutional Amendment Act is relevant at all, right?
yeah.
So I guess
I
we
mean,
are
we need to
closing in
rethink.
with more questions that
Sure. Thank you so much, Srinivas and Devushri and team. I mean, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to all of you in the last 2 hours. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for making time to join us today. Thank you, Benjamin. And this look forward to that possible. I think hopefully you will do that documentation about the way you went about working with the parastatal to bring in these climate change concerns into statutory master plan.
Sure, sure, sure.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.